Hi, my name's Dr. Badia. I'm a professor in computer science and psychology. I've been a professor for over 5 years now. Today, I wanted to talk about a topic that I've seen come up in many online forums, and that is how to navigate the political landscape in a PhD. It can be very tricky to know the different players in these different political games, and how do you deal with it all? So I'm going to give you my 6 insider tips to avoiding politics in academia. So let's jump on in. The first tip that I wish I would have known is to not take sides early. What will happen is you will go into a department at various stages in your career, and there's going to be players in these fields already, and you're not going to know who they are. And it might be completely unintuitive in terms of who has different beef with who and when this happened, etc. And you will actually find that very small things that happened 10, sometimes 20 years ago, people are still fighting about today. So what can happen is when you're joining a new department, you're sort of inherently asked to pick sides, and you didn't know that you were doing that. So I just want you to be very careful before you fully endorse one side or another, or even if you're, being encouraged to, listen to someone's problem on one side, that can be seen as aligning with one side of the issue. When you start out, I encourage you to really not make any moves. Just try to understand what's going on. Try to understand who is, competing against who, where the different factions are. Try not to make any moves at all when you're first starting out. My next tip is that every single connection matters. Every single connection. So I'm talking about the staff that are supporting your program, the undergrads that you talk to, every professor that you take a class from, the people that you meet at conferences. Every single one of these people could matter a great deal. They may or may not, but I'm here to tell you that the situations where I thought I was interacting with someone that had very little consequence to my career sometimes ended up being the biggest consequential situations. So you really don't know. You have no idea which of those connections or interactions are going to end up leading to something really big and important, or maybe putting you on the wrong side of a situation if you did not represent yourself well. So just consider every single interaction as being important and try to show up and represent yourself as well as you can in that particular moment. That can feel very stressful, but seriously, try to think of every single opportunity as a situation where you can make a good impression or a bad impression, and every single one of those matters. My third tip is to work on your communication skills. I think that people starting out don't appreciate what a big impact good communication or bad communication can have on your reputation and what people say and think about you. So this is everything from how promptly you respond to emails. Do you respond at all? Do you, successfully read the emails and, respond with information that they're requesting? When you're talking to people, do you, give good feedback? When they ask you to do something, then do you actually deliver on it? Okay, these are all in the realm of communication skills. So you need to work on making sure that you are being prompt, clear, and you are actually doing what you say you will do in a reasonable time frame. If you start to fail on some of those, you will start to get this reputation as being someone unreliable that people don't want to work with, and that gets out, even in small interactions. Like I said, you don't know who all of the major players are, so you might, fail to respond to a particular professor for a long period of time. They will remember that. Professors and people in academia can be notoriously petty, so just really work hard at being diligent and prompt and have effective communication in terms of any time people are emailing you directly with immediate requests. Tip number 4 is remember that these are work colleagues. It can be confusing when you're in a PhD program because you kind of blur the line where historically you've been in other programs and other students have been, your colleagues and your friends. In a PhD, it is a little bit more like a colleague. Certainly you're gonna make great friends, and I hope you do so, but more likely than not, they're going to be your work colleagues, and you should just treat them as a work colleague in the sense that you should have a certain level of professionalism when you're interacting with them. That means don't overshare information that might not be terribly relevant. Don't divulge information that you wouldn't want a colleague to know. You might think someone is your friend, but there might be situations where you are maybe telling someone something in confidence that you would tell a friend, but not a work colleague. These people are work colleagues. So If you wouldn't tell a work colleague a particular piece of information, don't tell the other people in your PhD program that piece of information as well. And the reason I bring this up is that I see time and again people get into weird political situations where they divulge information to someone that they trust that ultimately tells someone else, and it gets around and the person might get in trouble, or even worse, they just have a lowered reputation. That can be just as bad as formally getting in trouble. There's not a lot of ways we can actually get in trouble in academia, but if you start to have a bad reputation for something, that can be just as negative, and you might not see that coming because if you think of someone as a friend, of course, and you've shared that information in confidence. And with that said, it's important to note that this is a competitive situation where you may have lots of friends, but you also might be competing for resources. So you might be competing for your advisor's time if you're in the same lab. Maybe you're competing for grants. Maybe you're competing for ultimate jobs in that field. So while you might want to feel like everyone is your friend, they might feel a little bit of competitive pressure with you, and they might be collecting information on you to use later and ultimately kind of get ahead of you in a particular situation. So just be aware, these people are your colleagues. Tell them things you would tell colleagues, and save personal information for times where you truly know that you have a sincere friendship that will last outside of academia. My fifth piece of advice is to recognize the power dynamic. Now, this is touchy, and I feel like I shouldn't be saying this as a professor. This is kind of like the behind the scenes part of it, but you're all my friends on the internet. And I think you should know this, that there is a power dynamic, and you need to be aware of that in particular interactions. What could happen to you is something negative could happen, okay? And you might feel like you need to, have some kind of justice in this situation. You really need to think about the power dynamic when you're doing that. So for example, maybe you don't like how a particular professor, maybe your advisor, is treating you. Very fair, it happens more than people want to admit. There is a power dynamic there. So the people they're going to, believe and ultimately kind of side with tend to be the people in power. That's the advisor. So if you have beef with anyone in a higher power situation than you, it's probably not going to work out well for you if you escalate it. And that's just truly me being as honest as I can be. I've seen it negatively impact people over and over again, where they had a very real problem, a completely valid problem with an advisor or another professor, and they feel justified in escalating it because that's probably what you would do in a normal workplace, right? But because of the power dynamic, it negatively impacted the student, negatively impacted their career, sometimes meant that they had to leave the department or program. So just be very careful if you do have a problem with someone who's at a higher level than yourself, because it might ultimately negatively impact you. And if you can deal with it to some degree, it might be easier than trying to escalate it through the proper channels. Now, that's not to say if there's some, harm, literal harm that's happening to you, of course you need to report that. I'm just saying be mindful of these power dynamics that are very real, and it will apply to you as well. As a PhD student, you will have more power over master students and undergrads as well. So don't wield your power recklessly. Be aware that you do have a certain amount of power in that situation and be responsible with it. My sixth and last piece of advice for navigating political environments in academia is about what to do when you have a problem in your personal life, okay? I'm bringing this up because this happened to me, so I'll give you a real story around it. But basically what you'll find is the times when you're more likely to do something that you regret will be when you're under a lot of stress from something in your personal life, maybe something that's going wrong, in some other avenue. That can be really hard, and you're already stressed out, so you bring it to work, and maybe you don't act appropriately or as well as you normally do in some situations, right? And it's just a fluke, it's an accident, you didn't mean to, okay? This actually happened to me when I was a postdoc. I was applying to faculty positions and I was so stressed out. I was running to multiple interviews, you have to fly out, you have to do the job talk, it's so stressful, right? During that time, I was working with a graduate student and I was helping her with this project. And she was asking questions, very reasonable questions about part of the project, and I simply did not have time to answer them. I was running from one meeting to another, and I yelled at her. I said, like something very kind of dismissive and rude. I was like, we can't figure this out, you know, we'll talk about it later. But it was inappropriate for me to say that. It was inappropriate for me to do it in that manner. And she felt very bad about it. Of course she did. So what I should have done in that situation is I should have recognized I was under a lot of stress. I was not in a state to be physically in the lab and interacting with people. I needed to separate myself and take a moment to make sure that I was in a good place to be around and be a good colleague. I wasn't a good colleague. I wasn't a good mentor at that particular time. And I should have had the foresight to remove myself from the environment. But I didn't, you know, I said some things that I regret. And ultimately what I did is I apologized. I apologized to her multiple times over and over again. Almost every time I see her, I want to apologize to her. And we're good friends now. She's a faculty member, yay. But yeah, that was inappropriate and I shouldn't have done it. But when you do act poorly, you want to apologize. That's so key. You need to mean the apology. I think that is important. And I will say that particular situation got back to me, basically. Somehow the other people who heard it, you know, told other people who told other people who told other people. So much so I was in a different lab in a different state. It got all the way back to my original PhD advisor, and she set me down and had this conversation about like how this was inappropriate. So something simple like that, like having a lapse of judgment, that one instance can get all the way back to you. So I've had all of these things that I'm talking about today happen to me in terms of politics. These are my tips for helping you avoid these issues. Academia is a challenging place to be in because you're navigating all of these personalities, but I hope this video helps you prepare for that situation. If you found this video useful, please give it a like and subscribe for more content on academic success. Take care.